And hi there, ladies and gentlemen. Hi there, and welcome. Welcome to Benchley Night. It is Sunday night. It is not a reasonably fine art talk, and I still have that up down there on the right. I'm going to try to take care of that right now, ladies and gentlemen, before I do anything else. This will drive me nuts if I keep looking at that. Bye-bye. Anyway, it is Christmas Eve all over the world, except where it's already Christmas, except where they don't celebrate Christmas. But it's Christmas Eve here in Bellows Falls, Vermont. Now, the great Betty Sue is down in Austin, Texas. She's down in Austin, Texas, having dinner with her friends, Michael Fracasso and Jim Lewis, who all claim to be misanthropes, but they're actually not. They're very nice people. I guess misanthropes can be nice people, but they're less misanthropic than they say they are. But I'm here at home in Bellows Falls, Vermont. And today I spent the afternoon in the studio working on paintings for my show next fall in Bozeman, Montana. And while doing that, studio cat Corduroy did some very much needed sleeping. And I listened to Rachel Maddow's prequel on audiobook. It's a wonderful book, ladies and gentlemen. I highly recommend it. If you want to sally forth into 2024 without being terrified out of your mind about American fascism. But let's not think about American fascism at the moment. Let's celebrate that those of us who have nothing else better to do on Christmas Eve are going to gather together for the annual reading of The Bird's Christmas Carol. Now, The Bird's Christmas Carol is a lugubrious tale that was much loved by my mother. It was written by Kate Douglas Wiggin, who I was going to read up about and tell you who she was, but I forgot to do that. So that's not happening tonight. But tomorrow night, after this, tomorrow night, same time, same place, we're going to have part two of The Bird's Christmas Carol. And I will have read up on Kate Douglas Wiggin by that time. But right now, over there, we have two narcotized cats over by the wood stove. They are mad at me because I locked the door this afternoon. It was rainy here. And I did not want them being outside. They're black cats, ladies and gentlemen. It gets dark at about 4:30 in the afternoon here. And I did not want them running around in the rain, in the dark. And they were asleep. And when they were not paying attention, I locked the door for the night. And when they woke up, they were mad. They were mad. I put out treats, and they looked at me and were like, and walked into the other room. Then when I wasn't looking, they ate the treats. But anyway, we are gathered to read The Bird's Christmas Carol, Part 1. And I am asking those who feel so inclined to toss $1 or $2 to the liberal snowplowing do-gooders in the form of Rockingham for Progress with our diner project. And I know some people donated, but the whole Facebook system right now is cattywampus, as they say. So I just have to do a general shout out from the unidentified unglet to all of you who donated. Thank you so much. And tomorrow we'll do another shout out, and if I can figure out who it was who donated, you'll get individual names. Send me a personal message saying, I tossed $1 or $2. I tossed $1 or $2 to Rockingham for Progress, and I would like a shout out. But only do that if you actually did do that. But anyway, hey, Gary Pierce. Hey, Martha Rowley. Hey, Helen. Hey, Tony Hewlett. And there's Terry Hudson off the train, I guess. Terry Hudson, ladies and gentlemen, just took the train from Fort Lauderdale, Florida, to New York City. And I think it took 31 hours, she said. And she said you could have flown there in just a couple of hours. I beg to differ. Just a few weeks ago, Sarah Ovenden flew to Fort Lauderdale, and it took her about 31 hours. So it evens out. Betty Sue says hi. Hi, Betty Sue. Hi, Betty Sue. I miss you, beloved. Anyway, it is time to start the Bird's Christmas Carol. Are you ready? Chapter 1, A Little Snowbird. It was very early Christmas morning, and in the stillness of the dawn, with the soft snow falling on the housetops, a little child was born into the Bird household. They had intended to name the baby Lucy if it was a girl, but they had not expected her on Christmas morning, and a real Christmas baby was not to be lightly named. The whole family agreed on that. They were consulting about it in the nursery. Mr. Bird said that he had assisted in naming the 3 boys, and he should leave this matter entirely to Mrs. Bird. Donald wanted the child called Dorothy after a pretty curly-haired girl who sat next to him in school. Paul chose Luella, for Luella was the nurse who had been with him during his whole babyhood, up to the time of his first trousers at age 37. No, it does not say at age 37. That is the spirit, ladies and gentlemen, of my father inserting himself into this reading. My father could not stand the Bird's Christmas Carol. And so in as an antidote to the Bird's Christmas Carol, he would read us Edith's Christmas Burglar, which we had last week by Robert Benchley. But my mother, who otherwise was quite an unsentimental woman, who was known to drown kittens and had no qualms whatsoever about dispatching chickens to the great hereafter, she would tear up reading this, not tonight's part, ladies and gentlemen, tomorrow night's part. Anyway, I will not interject more smart-ass remarks in the middle of the Bird's Christmas Carol anymore. So Paul chose Luella, for Luella was the nurse who had been with him during his whole babyhood up to the time of his first trousers, and the name suggested all sorts of comfortable things. Uncle Jack said that the first girl should always be named for her mother, no matter how hideous the name happened to be. Grandma said she'd prefer not to take any part in the discussion, and everybody suddenly remembered that Mrs. Bird had thought of naming the baby Lucy for Grandma herself. And while it would be indelicate for her to favor that name, it would be against human nature for her to suggest any other under the circumstances. Hugh, the hitherto baby, if that is a possible term, sat in one corner and said nothing, but felt in some mysterious way that his nose was out of joint, much like the cats this afternoon when they found they were locked inside. He felt in it some mysterious way that his nose was out of joint. There was a newer baby now, a possibility he had never taken into consideration. And the first girl, too, a still higher development of treason, which made him actually green with jealousy. But it was too profound a subject to be settled then and there on the spot. Besides, Mamma had not been asked, and everybody felt it rather absurd, after all, to forestall a decree that was certain to be absolutely wise, just, and perfect. The reason that the subject had been brought up at all so early in the day lay in the fact that Mrs. Bird never allowed her babies to go overnight unnamed. She was a person of so great decision of character that she would have blushed at such a thing. She said to let blessed babies go dangling and dawdling without names for months and months, that was enough to ruin them for life. She also said that if one could not make up one's mind in 24 hours, It was a sign that, but I will not repeat the rest, as it might prejudice you against that most charming woman in the world. So, Donald took his new velocipede and went out to ride up and down the stone pavement and notch the shins of innocent people as they passed by, while Paul spun his musical top on the front steps. But Hugh refused to leave the scene of action. That's the hitherto baby whose nose is out of joint. Okay. He seated himself on the top stair in the hall, banged his head against the railing a few times, just by way of uncorking the vials of his wrath, and then subsided into gloomy silence, waiting to declare war if more first girl babies were thrust upon a family already surfeited with that unnecessary article. Meanwhile, dear Mrs. Bird lay in her room, weak but safe and happy, with her sweet girl baby by her side, and the heaven of motherhood opening again before her. Nurse was making gruel in the kitchen, and the room was dim and quiet. There was a cheerful open fire on the grate, but though the shutters were closed, the side windows that looked out onto the church of our Savior next door were a little bit open. Suddenly, a sound of music poured out into the bright air and drifted into the chamber. It was the boy choir singing Christmas anthems. Higher and higher rose the clear, fresh voices, full of hope and cheer, as children's voices always are. Fuller and fuller grew the burst of melody as one glad strain fell upon another in joyful harmony. Carol, brothers, carol, carol joyfully. Carol the good tidings, carol merrily, and pray a gladsome Christmas for all you fellow men. Carol, brothers, carol, 'tis Christmas Day again. One verse followed another, always with the same sweet refrain. And pray a gladsome Christmas for all ye fellow men. Carol, brothers, carol, 'tis Christmas Day again. Mrs. Bird thought, as the music floated in upon her gentle sleep, that she had slipped into heaven with her new baby, and that the angels were bidding them welcome. But the tiny bundle by her side stirred a little, and though it was scarcely more than the ruffling of a feather, she awoke, for the mother ear is so close to the heart that it can hear the faintest whisper of a child. She opened her eyes and drew the baby closer. It looked like a rose, dipped in milk, she thought, this pink and white blossom of girlhood, or like a pink cherub with its halo of pale yellow hair, finer than flossed silk. Carol, brothers, carol, carol joyfully, carol the good tidings, carol merrily. The voices were brimming over with joy. Why, my baby, whispered Mrs. Bird in soft surprise. I had forgotten what day it was. You are a little Christmas child, and we will name you Carol, Mother's Christmas Carol. What? Said Mr. Bird, coming in softly and closing the door behind him. Why, Daddy, no, why, Donald, don't you think Carol is a sweet name for a Christmas baby? It came to me just a moment ago in the singing, as I was lying here half asleep and half awake. Oh, I think it is a charming name, dear heart, and sounds just like you. And I hope that, being a girl, this baby has some chance of being as lovely as her mamma. At which speech from the baby's papa, Mrs. Bird, though she was as weak and tired as she could be, blushed with happiness. And so Carol came by her name. Of course, it was thought foolish by many people, though Uncle Jack declared laughingly that it was very strange if a whole family of birds could not be indulged in a single carol, and Grandma, who adored the child, thought the name much more appropriate than Lucy, but was glad that people would probably think that it was short for Caroline. Perhaps because she was born in holiday time, Carol was a very happy baby. Of course, she was too tiny to understand the joy of Christmastide, but people say there's everything in a good beginning, and she may have breathed in unconsciously the fragrance of evergreens and holiday dinners, while the peals of sleigh bells and the laughter of happy children may have fallen upon her baby ears and wakened in them a glad surprise at the merry world she had come to live in. Her cheeks and her lips were as red as holly berries. Her hair was for all the world the color of a Christmas candle flame. Her eyes were bright as stars. Her laugh like a chime of Christmas bells. In her tiny hands, forever outstretched in giving. Such a generous little creature you never saw. A spoonful of bread and milk had always to be taken by Mama or by Nurse before Carol could enjoy her supper. Whatever bit of cake or sweetmeat found its way into her pretty fingers was straightway broken in half to be shared with Donald, Paul, or Hugh. And when they made believe to nibble the morsel with affected enjoyment, she would clap her hands and crow with delight. "Why does she do it?" asked Donald thoughtfully. "None of us boys ever did." "I hardly know," said Mamma, catching her darling to her heart, "except that she is a little Christmas child, and so she has a tiny share of the blessedest birthday that the world ever knew." That's the end of chapter 1, ladies and gentlemen. We have a couple more chapters tonight. Now, I know that it is Christmas Eve, but I figure anybody who's with us tonight is kind of looking for something to do. So we're just going to plow right through to the halfway point in this story. And then tomorrow night, we'll come to the culmination. You won't want to miss that. Anyway, it's a joy to have you all with us tonight. I am delighted to be reading The Bird's Christmas Carol. On to chapter 2 and the first foreshadowing, ladies and gentlemen. The first foreshadowing. Before I start chapter 2, I'm going to take a little sip of wine. Chapter 2. Drooping Wings. It was December, 10 years later. Carol had seen 9 Christmas trees lighted on her birthday, one after another. 9 times she had assisted in the holiday festivities of the household, though in her babyhood her share of the gaieties was somewhat limited. For 5 years, certainly, she had hidden presents from Mama and Papa in their own bureau drawers and harbored a number of secrets sufficiently large to burst a baby brain. And had it not been for the relief gained by whispering them all to Mama at night when she was in her crib, a proceeding which did not in the least lessen the value of the secret in her innocent mind. For 5 years she had heard 'twas the night before Christmas and hung up a scarlet stocking, many sizes too large for her, and pinned a sprig of holly on her little white nightgown to show Santa Claus that she was truly a Christmas child, and dreamed of fur-coated saints and toy packs and reindeer. And she had wished everybody a Merry Christmas before it was light in the morning, and lent every one of her new toys to the neighbors' children before noon, and eaten turkey and plum pudding and gone to bed at night in a trance of happiness at the day's pleasures. Donald was away at college now. Paul and Hugh were great manly fellows, taller than their mamma. Papa Bird had gray hairs in his whiskers, and Grandma, God bless her, had been 4 Christmases in heaven. But Christmas in the bird's nest was scarcely as merry now as it used to be in the bygone years, for the little child that once brought such an added blessing to the day. Oh, I read that wrong. I read that wrong, ladies and gentlemen. Let's back right up. But Christmas in the bird's nest was scarcely as merry now as it used to be in the bygone years. For the little child that once brought such an added blessing to the day lay month after month a patient, a helpless invalid in the room where she was born. She had never been very strong in body. It was with a pang of terror that her mother and father noticed soon after she was 5 years old that she began to limp ever so slightly, to complain a bit too often of weariness, and to nestle close to her mother, saying she would rather not go out to play, please. The illness was slight at first, and hope was always stirring in Mrs. Bird's heart. Carol would feel stronger in the summertime, or she would be better when she'd spent a year in the country, or she will outgrow it, or we will try a new physician. But by and by it came to be all too sure that no physician, save one, could make Carol strong again, and that no summertime nor country air, unless it were the everlasting summertime in a heavenly country, could bring back the little girl to health. The cheeks and lips that were once as red as holly berries faded to faint pink. The star-like eyes grew softer, for they often gleamed through tears, and the gay child laugh that had been like a chime of Christmas bells gave place to a smile so lovely, so touching, so tender, so patient, that it filled every corner of the house with a gentle radiance that might have come from the face of the Christ child himself. Love could do nothing. And when we have said that, we have said all, for it is stronger than anything else in the whole wide world. Mr. and Mrs. Bird were talking it over one evening when all the children were asleep. A famous physician had visited them that day and told them that sometime, might be in a year, might be in more, Carol would slip quietly off into heaven from whence she had come. It is no use to close our eyes to it any longer, said Mr. Bird as he paced up and down the library floor. Carol will never be well again. It almost seems as if I could not bear it when I think of that loveliest child doomed to lie there day after day, and what is still more, to suffer pain that we are helpless to keep away from her. Merry Christmas indeed. It gets to be the saddest day of the year to me. And poor Mr. Bird sank into a chair by the table and buried his face in his hands to keep his wife from seeing the tears that would come in spite of all his efforts. But Donald, dear, said sweet Mrs. Bird with trembling voice, Christmas Day may not be so merry with us as it used to be, but it is very happy, and that is better, and very blessed, and that is better yet. I suffer chiefly for Carol's sake, but I have almost given up being sorrowful for my own. I am too happy in the child, and I see too clearly what she has done for us and for all the other children. Donald and Paul and Hugh were three strong, willful, boisterous boys, but now you seldom see such tenderness, devotion, thought for others, and self-denial in lads of their years. A quarrel or a hot word is almost unknown in this house. And why? Because Carol would hear it, and it would distress her. She is so full of love and goodness. The boys study with all their might and main. Why? Partly, at least, because they like to teach Carol and amuse her by telling her what they read. When the seamstress comes, she likes to sew in Miss Carol's room, because there she forgets her own troubles, which, heaven knows, are sore enough. And as for me, Donald, I am a better woman every day for Carol's sake. I have to be her ears, eyes, feet, hands, her strength, her hope. And she, my own little child, is my example. I was wrong, dear heart, said Mr. Bird more cheerfully. We will try not to repine, but to rejoice instead that we have an angel in the house. And as for her future, Mrs. Bird went on, I think we need not be over anxious. I feel as if she did not belong altogether to us, but that when she has done what God sent her for, he will take her back to himself, and it may not be very long. Here was poor Mrs. Bird's turn to break down, and Mr. Bird's turn to comfort her. Now, that's the end of chapter 2. We have another chapter to go, maybe another 2 chapters to go. But let's take a moment to see the comments people have left. Okay, the very tall cousin says, I am late to the party and happy to be here. Merry Christmas, everyone. Facebook user says, well, once again, I ended up in my own listening room, I guess. Yeah, I don't quite understand how that works, Martha, but well, except maybe it's not Martha, because Martha says 10 years later is never good. Well, Facebook user, I don't know which. The problem is we can see all the comments, but those of you in the little silos can only see each other's comments who are in that same silo. Tony Hewlick says, she is not sipping alone, or I am not sipping alone. She has her red too. And Martha says, perhaps Mrs. Bird shouldn't have taken her husband's name. That's true. That's true. But this was written in like 1890, Martha. And Terry Hudson, who was wearing the Betty Sue t-shirt, which many of you may know is a guarantee of on-time train travel. Her train from Fort Lauderdale to New York City arrived on time because she was wearing her Betty Sue Rocks the House t-shirt. She is no fool. Wendy, hi Wendy. Anyway, so nice that everybody's here. Let's move on to chapter 3. Shall we do that, ladies and gentlemen? We shall do that. Chapter 3, The Bird's Nest. One more sip, ladies and gentlemen. Carol herself knew nothing of motherly tears and fatherly anxieties. She lived on peacefully in the room where she was born. But you never would have known that room, for Mr. Bird had a great deal of money. And though he felt sometimes as if he wanted to throw it all into the sea, he didn't. He didn't is my father's interjection. Sorry, I'm going to go back to being my mother here. Though he felt sometimes as if he wanted to throw it all into the sea, since it could not buy a strong body for his little girl. Yet he was glad to make the place she lived in just as beautiful as it could be. The room had been extended by the building of a large addition that hung out over the garden below. It was so filled with windows that it might have been a conservatory. The ones on the side were thus still nearer the Church of Our Savior than they used to be. Those in front looked out on the beautiful harbor, and those in the back commanded a view of nothing in particular but a narrow alley. Nevertheless, they were the pleasantest of all to Carol, for the Ruggles family lived in the alley, and the 9 little, middle-sized, and big Ruggleses were a source of inexhaustible interest. The shutters could all be opened and Carol could take a real sunbath in this lovely glass house, or they could all be closed when the dear head ached or the dear eyes were tired. The carpet was of soft gray, with clusters of green bay and holly leaves. The furniture was of white wood on which an artist had painted snow scenes and Christmas trees and groups of merry children ringing bells and singing carols. Donald had made a pretty polished shelf and screwed it on the outside of the footboard, and the boys always kept this full of blooming plants, which they changed from time to time. The headboard, too, had a bracket on either side where there were pots of maidenhair ferns. That's why my mother liked this story. She was a fern person. She liked maidenhair ferns. She liked all ferns. Were pots of maidenhair ferns. Lovebirds and canaries hung in their golden houses in the windows, and they, poor caged things, could hop as far from their wooden perches as Carol could venture from her little white bed. On one side of the room was a bookcase filled with hundreds, yes, I mean it, hundreds and hundreds of books. Books with gay colored pictures, books without, books with black and white outline sketches, books with none at all, books with verses, books with stories, books that made children laugh, and some, only a few, that made them cry. Books with words of one syllable for tiny boys and girls, and books with words of fearful length to puzzle wise ones. This was Carol's circulating library. Every Saturday she chose 10 books, jotting their names down in a diary. Into these she slipped cards that said, "Please keep this book 2 weeks and read it. With love, Carol Bird." Then Mrs. Bird stepped into her carriage and took the 10 books to the children's hospital and brought home 10 others that she had left the fortnight before. This was a source of great happiness. For some of the hospital children that were old enough to print or write and were strong enough to do it, wrote Carol sweet little letters about the books, and she answered them, and they grew to be friends. It is very funny, but you do not always have to see people to love them. Just think about it and tell me if that is not so. There was a high wainscoting of wood about the room, and on top of this, in a narrow gilt framework, ran a row of illuminated pictures illustrating fairy tales, all in dull blue and gold and scarlet and silver. From the door to the closet, there was the story of the fair one with golden locks. From closet to bookcase ran Puss in Boots. From bookcase to fireplace was Jack the Giant Killer. And on the other side of the room were Hop o' My Thumb, Sleeping Beauty, and Cinderella. Then there was a great closet full of beautiful things to wear, but they were all dressing gowns and slippers and shawls, and there were drawers full of toys and games, but they were such as you could play with on your lap. There were no 9-pins, nor balls, nor bows and arrows, nor bean bags, nor tennis rackets. But after all, other children needed those more than Carol Bird, for she was always happy and contented, whatever she had or whatever she lacked. And after the room had been made so lovely for her, on her 8th Christmas, she always called herself in fun a bird of paradise. On these particular December days, she was happier than usual, for Uncle Jack was coming from England to spend the holidays. Dear, funny, jolly, loving, wise Uncle Jack, who came every 2 or 3 years and brought so much joy with him that the world looked as black as a thundercloud for a week after he went away again. The mail had brought this letter. London, November 28th, 1880. Wish you Merry Christmas, you dearest birdlings in America. Preen your feathers and stretch the bird's nest a trifle, if you please, and let Uncle Jack in for the holidays. I am coming with such a trunk full of treasures, you'll have to borrow the stockings of Barnum's giant and giantess. I am coming to squeeze a certain little ladybird until she cries for mercy. I am coming to see if I can find a boy to take care of a black pony that I bought lately. It's the strangest thing I ever knew. I've hunted all over Europe and can't find a boy to suit me. I'll tell you why. I've set my heart on finding one with a dimple in his chin, because this pony particularly likes dimples. Hurrah, cried Hugh. Bless my dear dimple. I'll never be ashamed of it again. Please drop a note to the clerk of the weather and have a good rousing snowstorm, say on the 22nd. None of your meek, gentle, nonsensical, shilly-shallying snowstorms, not the sort where the flakes float lazily down from the sky as if they didn't care whether they ever got here or not and then melt away as soon as they touch the earth, but a regular business-like whizzing, whirring, blizzing, a regular business-like whizzing, whirring, blurring, cutting snowstorm warranted to freeze and to stay on. I should like rather a large Christmas tree, if it is convenient, not one of those sprigs 5 or 6 feet high that you used to have 3 or 4 years ago when the birdlings were not fairly feathered out, but a tree of some size. Set it up in the garret if necessary, and then we can cut a hole in the roof if the tree chances to be too high for the room. Tell Bridget to begin to fatten a turkey. Tell her that by the 20th of December, that turkey must not be able to stand on its legs for fat. And then on the next 3 days, she must allow it to recline easily on its side and stuff it to bursting. 1 ounce of stuffing beforehand is worth a pound afterwards. Excuse me. The pudding must be unusually huge and darkly, deeply, lugubriously blue in color. It must be stuck so full of plums that the pudding itself will ooze out into the pan and not be brought onto the table at all. I expect to be there by the 20th to manage these little things myself, remembering it is the early bird that gets the worm. But I give you the instructions in case I should be delayed. And Carol, she must decide on the size of the tree. She knows best. She was a Christmas child after all. And she must plead for the snowstorm. The clerk of the weather may pay some attention to her. She must look up the boy with the dimple for me. She's likelier to find him than I am this minute. She must advise about the turkey. And Bridget, must bring the pudding to her bedside and let her drop every separate plum into it and stir it once for luck, or I'll not eat a single slice. For Carol is the dearest part of Christmas for Uncle Jack, and he'll have none of it without her. She is better than all the turkeys and all the puddings and apples and spare ribs and wreaths and garlands and mistletoe and stockings and chimneys and sleigh bells and Christendom. She is the very sweetest Christmas carol that was ever written, said, sung, or chanted. And I am coming as fast as ships and railway trains can carry me to tell her so. Oh, Carol's joy knew no bounds. Mr. and Mrs. Bird laughed like children, and they kissed each other for sheer delight. And when the boys heard it, they simply whooped like wild Indians until the Ruggles family, whose backyard joined their garden, gathered at the door and wondered what was up at the big house. All right, let's see what people have said recently. Wendy Welton says, hi, how are the cats, Wendy? Wendy has very excellent cats. Tony Hulick says she looks forward to this every year, as do I. Gary Pierce says, hi, Rick. Laura R. says, Merry Christmas, Charlie and Betty Sue. Facebook user, all alone in their little silo, says, enjoying the reading and finishing a split of champagne and a piece of Burdick raspberry tart. A good Christmas Eve to be sharing with friends. And that we are, ladies and gentlemen, that we are. Helen says, everybody take a sip every time the word bird is uttered. All right, we'll do that this next chapter. We have one last chapter to go before the end of tonight's reading. And Wendy says the cats are cuddly. All right. Chapter 4. Everyone doing okay out there? Thank you for sticking with us. Chapter 4. Birds of a feather flock together. Uncle Jack did really come on the 20th. He was not detained by business, nor did he get left behind or snowed up, as frequently happens in stories, and in real life too, I'm afraid. The snowstorm came also, and the turkey nearly died a natural and premature death from overeating. Donald came too, Donald with a line of down upon his upper lip, and Greek and Latin on his tongue, and stores of knowledge in his handsome head, and stories, oh, bless me, you could not turn over a chip without reminding Donald of something that happened at college. One or the other was always at Carol's bedside, but they fancied her paler than she used to be, and they could not bear her out of sight. It was Uncle Jack, though, who sat beside her in the winter twilights. The room was quiet and almost dark, save for the snow light outside and the flickering flame of the fire that danced over the sleeping beauty's face and touched the fair one's golden locks with ruddier glory. Carol's hand, all too thin and white these latter days, lay close clasped in Uncle Jack's, and they talked together quietly of many, many things. I want to tell you all about my plans for Christmas this year, Uncle Jack, said Carol on the first evening of his visit, because it will be the loveliest one I ever had. The boys laugh at me for caring so much about it, but it isn't altogether because it is Christmas. nor because it is my birthday. But long, long ago, when I first began to be ill, I used to think the first thing when I waked on Christmas morning, today is Christ's birthday and mine. I did not put the words close together, because that made it seem too bold. But I first said Christ's birthday out loud, and then in a minute, softly, to myself and mine. Christ's birthday and mine. And so I do not feel quite about Christmas as other girls do. Mamma says she supposes that ever so many other children have been born on this day. I often wonder where they are, Uncle Jack, whether 'tis a dear thought to them too, or whether I am so much in bed and so often alone that it means more to me. Oh, I do hope that none of them are poor or cold or hungry. And I wish they were as happy as I am, because they are really my little brothers and sisters. Now, Uncle Jack, dear, I am going to try and make somebody happy every single Christmas that I live. And this year, it is to be the Ruggleses in the Rear. That large and interesting brood of children in that little house at the end of the back garden? Yes. Isn't it nice to see so many together? And, Uncle Jack, why do the big families always live in the small houses and the small families in the big houses? We ought to call them the Ruggles children, of course, but Donald began talking of them as the Ruggleses in the Rear, and Papa and Mama took it up, and now we cannot seem to help it. The house was built for Mr. Carter's coachman, but Mr. Carter lives in Europe, and the gentleman who rents his place for him does not care what happens to it. And so this poor family came to live there. When they first moved in, I used to sit at my window and watch them play in their backyard. They are so strong and so jolly and so good-natured. And then one day, I had a terrible headache, and Donald asked them if they would please not scream quite so loudly. And they explained they were having a game of circus, but they would change and play. They would change and play Deaf and Dumb Asylum all the afternoon. Ha ha ha, laughed Uncle Jack. What an obliging family, to be sure. Yes, we all thought it was very funny, and I smiled at them from the window when I was well enough to be up again. Now, Sarah Maud comes to her door when the children come home from school, and if Mama nods her head, yes, that means Carol is very well. And then you ought to hear the little Ruggleses yell. I believe they try to see how much noise they can make. But if Mama shakes her head no, they always play at quiet games. Then, one day, Carrie, my pet canary, flew out of her cage, and Peter Ruggles, he caught her and brought her back, and I had him up here in my room to thank him. Is Peter the oldest? No, Sarah Maud is the oldest. She helps do the washing. Peter is next. He's a dressmaker's boy. And which is the pretty little red-haired girl? That's Kitty. And the fat youngster? Baby Larry. And that most freckled one? Now, don't laugh. That's Peoria. Carol, you are joking. No, really, Uncle dear. She was born in Peoria. That's all. And the next boy is named Oshkosh? No, laughed Carol. The others are Susan and Clement and Eiley and Cornelius, and they all look exactly alike, except that some of them have more freckles than the others. Ha How did you ever learn all their names? Why, I have what is called a window school. It is too cold now, but in warm weather I'm wheeled out on my balcony, and the Ruggleses come up and walk along our garden fence, and they sit down on the roof of our carriage house. That brings them quite near, and I tell them stories. On Thanksgiving Day they came up for a few minutes. It was quite warm at 11 o'clock. We told each other what we had to be thankful for, but they gave such queer answers that Papa had to run away for fear of laughing. I couldn't understand them very well. Susan was thankful for trunks, of all things in the world. Cornelius for horse cars. Kitty for pork steak. Well, Clem, who is very quiet, brightened up when I came to him and said he was thankful for his lame puppy. Wasn't that pretty? It might teach some of us a lesson, mightn't it, little girl? That's what Mama said. Now, I'm going to give this whole Christmas to the Ruggleses and Uncle Jack. I earned part of the money myself. You, my bird? How? I don't know if that warrants a drink or not. You, my bird. If the bird isn't capitalized, so I'm going to say it doesn't. Well, you see, it could not be my own Christmas if Papa gave all the money. And I thought to really keep Christ's birthday, I ought to do something of my very own. And so I talked with Mama. Of course, she thought of something lovely. She always does. Mama's head is just brimming over with lovely thoughts. All I have to do is ask, and out pops the very one I want. This thought was to let her write down, just as I told her, a description of how a child lived in her own room for 3 years and what she did to amuse herself. And we sent it to a magazine, and we got $25 for it. Just think. Well, well, cried Uncle Jack. My little girl is a real author. And what are you going to do with this wonderful own money of yours? I shall give the 9 Ruggleses a grand Christmas dinner here in this very room. That will be Papa's contribution. And afterwards, a beautiful Christmas tree, fairly blooming with presents. That would be my part. For I have another way of adding to my $25 so that I can buy nearly anything I choose. I should like it very much if you would sit at the head of the table, Uncle Jack, for nobody could ever be frightened of you, you dearest, dearest, dearest thing that ever was. Mama is going to help us, but Papa and the boys are going to eat together downstairs for fear of making the little Ruggleses shy. And after we've had a merry time with the tree, we can open my window and all listen together to the music at the evening church service, if it comes before the children go. I've written a letter to the organist and asked him if I might have the 2 songs that I like best. Will you see if it is all right? Bird's Nest, December. Bird's Nest. December 21, 1881. Dear Mr. Wilkie. Dear Mr. Wilkie, I am the little girl who lives next door to the church, and as I seldom go out, the music on practice days and Sundays is one of my greatest pleasures. I want to know if you can have Carol Brothers Carol on Christmas night, if the boy who sings My Ain Country so beautifully may please sing that too. I think it is the loveliest thing in the world but it always makes me cry. Doesn't it you? If it isn't too much trouble, I hope I can sing them both quite early, as after 10 o'clock I may be asleep. Yours respectfully, Carol Bird. P.S. The reason I like Carol Brothers Carol is because the choir boys sang it 11 years ago, the morning I was born, and put it into Mama's head to call me Carol. She did not remember then that my other name would be Bird. Because she was fast asleep, because she was half asleep, I could only think of one thing at a time. Donald said if I had been born on the 4th of July, they would have named me Independence, or if on the 22nd of February, Georgina, or even Cherry, like Cherry in Martin Chuzzlewit. But I like my own name and birthday best. Yours truly, Carol Bird. Uncle Jack thought the letter quite right and did not even smile at her telling her the organist so many family items. The days flew by as they always fly in holiday time, and it was Christmas Eve before anybody knew it. The family festival was quiet and very pleasant, but almost overshadowed by the grander preparations for the next day. Carol and Elfreda, her pretty German nurse, had ransacked books and introduced so many plans and plays and customs and merrymakings from Germany and Holland and England and a dozen other countries that you would scarcely have known how or when you were keeping Christmas. Even the dog and the cat had enjoyed their celebration under Carol's direction. Each had a tiny table with a lighted candle in the center and a bit of bologna sausage placed very near it, and everybody laughed till the tears stood in their eyes to see Villikins and Dinah struggle to nibble the sausages and at the same time to evade the candle flame. Villikins barked and sniffed and howled in impatience, and after many vain attempts succeeded in dragging off the prize, though he singed his nose in doing it. This is very cruel to the animals. Dinah, meanwhile, watched him placidly, her delicate nostrils quivering with expectation, and after all excitement had subsided, walked with dignity to the table, her beautiful gray satin tail sweeping behind her, and calmly putting up one velvet paw, drew the sausage gently down and walked out of the room without turning a hair, so to speak. Elfreda had scattered handfuls of seed over the snow in the garden. The wild birds might have a comfortable breakfast the next morning, and had stuffed bundles of dry grasses in the fireplaces so that the reindeer of Santa Claus could refresh themselves after their long gallops across country. This was really only done for fun, but it pleased Carol. And when, after dinner, the whole family had gone to the church to see the Christmas decorations, Carol limped out on her slender crutches and, with Elfreda's help, placed all the family boots in a row in the upper hall. That was to keep the dear ones from quarreling all through the year. There were Papa's stout top boots, Mama's pretty buttoned shoes next, then Uncle Jack's, Donald's, Paul's, and Hugh's, and at the end of the line, her own little white worsted slippers. Last and sweetest of all, like the children in Austria, she put a lighted candle in her window to guide the dear Christ child, lest he should stumble in the dark night as he passed up the deserted street. This done, she dropped into bed, a rather tired but very happy Christmas fairy. All right, ladies and gentlemen, that gets us to the halfway point. We will be back tomorrow for part 2 of The Birds' Christmas Carol. You take good care. Have a joyous holiday, and we'll see you tomorrow night. Bye-bye.